Welcome back to KBC News Check, and on this hour we'll be looking at gender-based violence and the female genital mutilation. We're just taking stock on where we are as a country, and I can tell you I have the experts right here in studio. Over 40% of women in Kenya, according to the statistic, are likely to face physical or sexual gender-based violence in their lifetime. And 1 in 5 girls could be facing child marriage or FGM. These are startling figures. Where are we? What about the safe houses? All that discussion right here. Allow me to bring in my panel. We have Dr. Joyce Mutinda, who is the chairperson of the National Gender and Equality Commission. Karibu sana, Daktari.
Asante.
And just next to her, we have Alberta Wambua, who works at the Gender Violence Recovery Center. Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
And maybe to start with you, where are we with the safe houses? Because the last time we talked, there were some safe houses that were being established either by PPPs and some by government.
Thank you so much. The Generational Equality Forum commitments, they have 12 commitments, and one of the commitments was actually to set up shelters in all the 47 counties. So where we are at now, we have 6 that are state-run or county-run. In some of the counties like Machakos, we have Makueni, so those are there, and then we have most of them being privately owned, which about 54, 56. So where we are at now is a point of advocacy and discussions with the government. Dr. Mutinda will speak to it, where then we're encouraging each county to be able to set up shelters that are county-run, because that's one of the major gaps that is there in terms of the care path for survivors of gender-based violence.
And yesterday, Daktari, I remember being a court reporter, I followed up that report by CJ Martha Koome, where she launched the first SGBV court in Mombasa. I'm quite sure that is quite some welcoming news when we talk about ending SGBVs and FGM.
Yes, thank you for having me in the studio today. And I'm very happy with the CJ having put up this court, because it will hasten the cases for GBV. Because the problem we have had is in a regular court, it may take quite a while before the perpetrator is finally put behind the bars forever. I just say forever because at times they go in for very long terms, and I would encourage that. Now, when it comes to the new courts, in fact, they are coming at a backdrop of where we have polycare. And polycare is where these people go, and gender-based violence victims go and report. And we think this is going to be a good one. We have only 2 polycares at the moment in this country that I can talk about, and that is the one in Nairobi, the old police station near Kenyatta National Hospital, and the other one is in Njue. I wouldn't say they are fully operational, but this is something that I would be calling on the national government and the other Koome, that is Inspector General of Police, to ensure that we have polycares in every county, so that the reporting is not just being done in the regular police stations, where the victims at times get a little bit molested by our staff, the police officers, who are not trained on how to handle gender-based violence victims and perpetrators. So I'm actually happy with the new courts, and I hope they will be in every county, so that we can deal with this matter.
And still on these cases, I remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, we had these cases, so many cases, and actually looking at the statistics, before COVID and after COVID, these cases increased after COVID. But now we are post-COVID. Where are we as a country?
I would say authoritatively, as a country, that GBV cases have gone down post-COVID. Now, having gone down is because, first of all, of what government has done, the commitments. There was a commitment that we made, and let me take Kenyans to an historical perspective, because this is something that has not just happened today. In 1995, the Beijing Platform of Action the country came up, like other parts of the world, to say that we need policy and legislation measures for GBV and FGM. And our country went forward. I think we know all the laws that are there today on this matter, on gender-based violence. And if we were just to say, just but a few of them, I know there is the Sexual Offences Act of 2006. We have the national policy for the eradication of FGM, and this is for 2019. In fact, it's referred to as sessional paper number 3 of 2019. We have the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act of 2015, criminalizing beating of our spouses. So that is now a criminal offense. Then we have the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act. It is a common one known of 2011. So Kenya went full blast and got the policies and the legislation. Now, during ICPD plus 25, the Nairobi Summit, that is what we call it, that is the International Conference on Population and Development, Kenya committed and said, we are going to end FGM by 2022 and we end GBV by 2030. In fact, it was His Excellency the President then who came up with this. Now, what has happened? This is post-2022. Has something gone wrong? I know people are asking that. And we are saying nothing has gone wrong. We know the famous Samburu elders condemning this practice, GBV and FGM. We know what happened in Narok. There has been a lot of activity. And we know there is a whole body in government that is dealing with gender-based, not gender-based violence, FGM, and FGM is just part of gender-based violence. And therefore the government has been working very hard. And when it came to generation equality that Alberta has talked about, we committed to end GBV by 2026. And we even gave ourselves a roadmap and said, first of all, we are going to implement fully the policies and the laws. Are we doing that in 2023? Yes. The policies are in force, the laws are in force. And I'll be coming to that because I know...
But the question is, are we on track to achieve that by 2026? Because everything has been laid down.
I'm saying we are on track. There are those things that we have not done, like ratifying ILO Convention 190 on sexual harassment in place work. But have we developed, for example, management information system? Yes, it is there. In NGEC, we have management information system for GBV. Courtesy of our partners and ourselves. This is where Equality Now came up and helped us. It is there online so that we can get these cases reported and we can act on them. Now, the other area that we have not done is the research. We are yet to do that. But I'm saying we are on course. And that is why, if you let me jump to Migori, what happened in Migori, although there was misinformation, there was something in the social media saying that this was in Kenya, and I'm calling on Kenyans, even today, to come forward and tell me where it happened in Kenya, where the militia were beating a very young girl. That is not Kenya, and I want Kenyans to come forward, whoever posted that, and tell me where it is on the ground. I'll deal with it. The DCI is ready, and our county commissioners are ready, the machinery is ready, the Minister of Interior. I can speak authoritatively on that one. But there was a case in Migori on the 26th of January. And this was, for all intended purposes, a bigger girl, 19-year-old. It happened on 26th January. It was dealt with ruthlessly. The brother got hold of her. She had come from a rescue center. She was going for books to go back to school. And the brother got hold of her, took her to the bush, and they did what they did. Now, the brother is already in police custody. He has appeared in court. So, the apparatus on the ground. And I want to thank the county commissioner, Mr. Meru Mwangi, because he acted so swiftly so that we had all the information that we needed. And that is why this time when we are dealing with zero tolerance to GBV this year, and the date is on 6th of February, we are focusing on Migori.
Okay, and we will be touching on some of the successes that your commission has had in addressing these issues, as well as the partnerships, because every time that we hear about gender-based violence, we hear a lot of partners, and especially from outside the country, but we'll be touching on that. Alberta, coming back to you, the chairman has talked about, the chairperson here has talked about some of the laws that govern us, and even I can add the FGM Act of 2011, and the most common that we hear in court, the Sexual Offences Act of 2006. There are all these laws, there are all these policies, but a lot of people do not realize that I'm in an abusive relationship. That is one. Another thing, when you talk about gender-based violence, the picture that comes on everyone's mind is of a lady being abused. They forget that even men do undergo the same kind of treatment, where some, or many for that matter, decide to keep it under wraps, kangumu. But they do not understand that this is something that can land somebody in court. I want you to talk about awareness.
Thank you. So yes, there's a lot of awareness that needs to be done across across all communities and spaces, so to speak. As you rightfully said, that there are people who might not even be aware that they're being abused or even perpetrating violence because it's culturally entrained or entrenched, or that's the social norm. That's how they've grown up. That's how they've been socialized. So yes, there is a lot of awareness to be done across. And there, to add to also what you asked, is that there are different forms of gender-based violence. I'll speak to that, but I'll also need to add that gender-based violence is not just perpetrated against women, as you said, but it's also perpetrated against men. And just that a lot of people think about the women, because 90% of where I work, 90% of the survivors of gender-based violence survivors are females, and 90% again of the alleged perpetrators are male. But that's not, that's a lot, because in a year, for example, at GVC would support about 4,000 survivors of gender-based violence.
Every year?
Every year.
Just one center? Just
one center, Gender Violence Recovery Center. So if you say 10% of that are male, that means about 400 men and boys, and youngest being unborn babies. You know, a woman is beaten, loses a baby, youngest survivor has been a 3-day-old sexual violated, defiled girl. So all forms of violence. Talking to forms of violence, of gender-based violence, so we have sexual violence. For many years, GVC has been there over 20 decades. For many years, it used to be about 90% of the cases would receive. It's now 76% of the cases would receive. And then we have domestic violence, intimate partner violence, we have psychological, emotional, we have economic violence, we have child marriage, as you said, for example, earlier, we have female genital mutilation. So all these are forms of gender-based violence. Now, they can, I would rightfully say that they can also happen to either gender. So we've had men who've been who've undergone forced male circumcision, for example, around 2007, around the election violence. It's important to also mention that sometimes you do not get a certain form of violence in isolation. If you're sexually violated, you might find they're physically assaulted, they're psychologically abused, so to speak. Talking about the laws earlier and talking about access to justice, I would like to say that it's not just dependent on the judiciary, but the whole spectrum of the ecological or the community. If someone is abused, for example, they need to understand that if they're defiled, they don't need to shower, they need to, reserve the clothes, the evidence, go to hospital within 72 hours. At the hospital, you have the different clinicians who need to know how to take the history, to document, with the right national tools like the post-rep care forms and all that. They have to treat within the national guidelines of clinical management. They need to provide the psychological support. The shelters that we spoke to earlier, they need to know that they need to go to a safe space. There's been a gap, as mentioned, about the case that Dr. mentioned, that, and that's now a whole conversation around it, about SOPs and policies and what needs to guide these safe spaces or shelters. Then we go to the court process, and rightfully said what the CJ has said, rolling out the courts, because then even at GVC, only about 15% actually 10 to 15% of the cases we see will follow through to the court process because of a number of reasons, you know, being, for example, accessibility, the cost. There was a cost study done by Njue some years back. It could be how sensitive, for example, are all the service providers at all these service points, you know, the police, are they sensitive enough? The clinicians, are they ready to, you know, serve you? Are the facilities, the dispensaries with the different levels of healthcare facilities able to provide the services, the documentation, are the counselors there? Does also the community, for example, and the survivors understand the need for that psychological support? Very few people appreciate mental wellness and mental health. The follow-up, when survivors are integrated back to communities or they are going through their healing process, we tolerating them, is the integration back to society, you know, smooth? Because just as you heard, the girl went back home, but she was, you know, kidnapped and went through the female genital mutilation, because that's what the community believes. That's what the community believes. And sometimes survivors, going back to what you're saying, survivors might not want to be abused. I've met ladies and women who did not want to be circumcised. But because if I go fetch water and I'm not circumcised, you know, the rest of the girls don't want to associate with me. I met a lady who was circumcised just before she gave birth. She had refused, went through education and all that, but just when she was in labor, her husband left, the aunties came and they took her and forced her to be circumcised before they took her to hospital. At that particular point, she wouldn't have the strength, you know, and all that. Yeah, because they believe if you have a baby and you're not circumcised, it's a taboo baby, so to say, yeah? So there are all these things. So what I'm trying to say, it's at every level, there has to be that awareness. It's not just to the public, but it's to everyone. Because even as I work at the center, I've been socialized and raised in this particular community, for example, that is okay with gender-based violence or what is being perpetrated. It's more like a cultural norm, or it's a socialization and all that. So even as we say, the police, the teacher, Alberta, the healthcare workers and all that, we still come from this same community. So it has to be right across. Wow.
Quite a story. During labor. Anyway, away from that, just out of curiosity, you have men in your recovery center, right?
Yes.
And there are so many forms of gender-based violence.
Yes.
What are some of the men there saying happened, or what is their story? So which is the most common form of abuse for the men in your recovery center?
Yes. So most of the common form of abuse would be emotional. And interestingly, the emotional abused men will not come to the center. Very few of them will. Because we also do a lot of community awareness and awareness in different existing structures across the country. That's where the men would come out and say, this and this is happening. And there are male engagement sessions that happen. So there they'll talk about the emotional abuse. Or in social spaces, as much as you try to avoid, once they realize that myself or my colleagues work in a gender violence recovery center, then they will open up. And there's once I went and sat somewhere and suddenly I had 5 men I didn't know, and they were busy opening up about the abuses they are undergoing in their relationships with their wives, with their partners. So that's one. 2, physical violence would be the next one. So we've received men who've had hot water poured on them, burns, serious burns, hot oil. We've received men who've had their penises cut. You know, there's a year we had like 4 of them. There's a year one came with their balls, you know, in a paper. So it happens, yes. So men undergo physical violence. The next form of violence by men would be sexual violence. So I've seen men who've been sodomized. I've seen men who've undergone even gang rapes. And as you earlier said, you said something about kangumu. The men that I've seen who've been violated are also very keen on who treats them. So for example, they might not want me to go and visit them, you know, in the wards or in the casualty. They'd want male. So we also have male colleagues who are able, you know, counselors and medics and all that, to be able to provide that. And then not a lot of them, but I've also met men who would really, as you say, kangumu, would want to keep it to themselves. So whereas the women will try and bring their partners or their support systems, the men would want to go through it by themselves. So they will not tell their partners. I've met men who really do not want to tell their partners that they are taking PEP, the post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. They just want to keep it to themselves. They're home, they're just quiet, you know. They would come back for counseling sessions and support groups and say, my wife is wondering what's happening. Though we encourage, you know, let's have this conversation and share and all that. So they really keep quiet. When you talk about Kangumu, men will only come to the center, as I said, when it's serious physical, severe injuries, mostly, or it's been repetitive violence. It's now at the mefika mwisho, you know. And I've met men who, I've met a boy, for example, who came to the center, was about 23 years old. He had been sodomized when he was much younger, and this is the only time he told the father. And this is the time then they're coming for help. So yeah, there are all those dynamics about that.
Wow, interesting conversation. Doc, looking at your commission, let's look at FGM. We're talking about, we gave ourselves 2030, right? To be done with the FGM? 2026?
We have come down to 2026.
All right. Where are we as a country? Because if we look at what even Alberta talked about, our culture, and I come from a community where we still have that. It's not quite eradicated yet. And we will go to some parts of Kisii as well, and in some Samburu as well. We still have some cultures who still cling on to FGM. And as a country, and of course as a commission, you're very keen to ensure that the 2026 deadline is beat.
Yes, thank you very much. We are really very keen to even beat the deadline earlier than that. Remember, at one point we talked of 2022.
Yeah.
Now, where is Kenya? There is a lot of information, which I call misinformation, that FGM is escalating. It is not. What has happened is a change that has happened. We did not anticipate that change at the beginning, and this is cross-border FGM. Yeah. And this is what we have now in Migori. The courier community, 3/4 of couriers are in Tanzania. Only 1/4 is in Kenya. Now, they believe in FGM. So what is happening is that when in Kenya it is outlawed, they will walk across the porous border and go and have it done. And when it is not done, the young men across the border in Kenya will want to have it done because this is their community. So there is need now to relook at our strategies and think East African, think of our porous borders, because what is happening right now is not because in Kenya it has not gone down, it's because of those borders. Now, what about Samburu? Has it gone down? Considerably so. So that those who want to do it, and I'm sorry to say this, they have now devised another method of waiting when a girl child is born, they cut, so that nobody gets to know. So this is
This a kid who is a few days old.
It may even be one day. The kid doesn't know what is happening, but the parents have agreed so that we shall not be seen by the government to do the wrong thing. When the kid is born, then we get that kid cut. And who is doing it? Our medics. I want to call upon each and every of our medics to desist from doing that. I've even been telling the young men, sincerely, that piece of meat you want to cut, and I can say this authoritatively, is what will make you enjoy more. Don't you want to enjoy?
With that, I concur.
Yes. So there's no need of cutting. It doesn't matter who you are, but this is the wrong thing. And I think this is why we have the theme for this year's Zero Tolerance Day, where we say we don't tolerate FGM.
Actually, that is one thing and that we will also be touching on, so that you may tell us exactly, you know, a theme is just a theme unless we work on it. So what is the Commission's gearing towards in regards to making the theme quite substantial here in Kenya and now, work for us?
I want to clarify one thing, that we are a constitutional commission. And our mandate is to ensure that policies are there, they have no gaps, that would injure the rights of any individual in this country. The next one is the legislation. Is the legislation there? And I said the legislation does exist. The other thing is to check the practice. So who is the implementer? It is the executive arm of government. Ministry X, Ministry Y. Now, in this case, it's the Ministry of Public Service, Gender and Affirmative Action. That is the implementer. And they have an agency, the FGM board, that has to do this. So for us is to oversight and make sure that they are doing that which should be done. Now, when it comes to that theme, what is it that NGEC has done? We have looked at the theme, interrogated the same. That theme is partnership with men and boys to transform social and gender norms to end FGM. Why are we now focusing on the men? Who is it who was the perpetrator in Migori? Of course, it was the brother. That's a man. It is not the time when we said the women were the ones doing FGM activities. The men are doing it. Who is taking their wife to be, if so to say, to be cut? It is this man. So if we ignore the man factor, the boy factor, then we are not going to end FGM. And that is where, at the beginning, we thought it was a women's affair, because in northeastern Kenya, it is the women who do this activity. In Meru, it was the women who were doing this activity. And the interventions therein have changed those women. They are now our allies. They don't want to cut anymore. And the girls are being educated. You know, instead of being cut, because the idea of bringing them together to cut them was to educate them to be women and what they can do with their children, with cooking, with their wife, with their husbands. Now, this is being taught without them having been cut. That is happening in Meru. And I would want to thank Maendeleo ya Wanawake, because such initiatives is what should be there, so that we don't lose our very good cultural practices. But then the harmful ones should not be perpetrated. And the person to stop that is the boy child, is the man who has been perpetrating it. Indeed. And I want to call on men, once more, I want to remind them, if you want to enjoy, please fight that cut. And
I agree with you. And Alberta, I would like you to also touch on that, because I come from the Mount Kenya East part of Kenya, where we are notorious for that. Not everyone per se, but they still propagated. And I totally concur with the chairperson of National Gender Commission, that we as the men can contribute wholly towards ending FGM, because you find that if a lady has not undergone the cut, you cannot get married to, or you lose the value, the market value. But if I say that I want to get married and I want someone who has not undergone the cut, I think that plus the advocacy, boys and men, I think we can end this.
I totally agree. And as the chair has rightfully said, for a long time, even not just fighting female genital mutilation, but also gender-based violence, we used to engage the women and girls and left out the boys. But it's gender-based violence is, as we said, it's both genders. And speaking about earlier about the power dynamics and being in a patriarchal society, and as you also say, is that then the men and boys have control over resources, over leadership, over a lot of things. So once you engage them, and you're very right, and that was used actually even in the Moran community.
All right. Where the kindly hold the thought. We need to cross over to Governor Mohamed Khalif of Wajir, speaking on the launch of the Horn of Africa groundwater project at the Pan-Afric Hotel, but we will be getting back to that as soon as it's ready. Kindly proceed with your point, and apologies for that.
No, that's okay. So, thought. So yes, so the Morans, I was giving an example of the Morans who had to be engaged. For a long time, you know, they're engaging the female cutters and all that. So the men had to be engaged. I told you know what, you can also marry women who are not circumcised. And that started changing the narrative. So I totally agree. Something else that we've not touched on is female genital mutilation around, would I say politically instigated or something like that. So around elections, you'd find that there are certain gangs that come up, and then you're told women are now being forced, you know, to be cut, or if you're a wife to this particular
and
political...
we had that in the report of 2007 post-election chaos.
Yes. So that's also another aspect to tie up. Other thing that tying up with female genital mutilation, when it's done at a certain... First, it's wrong. But when it's done, earlier I think one of us mentioned it, is that the child marriage aspect. So you find the girls are circumcised, which is again wrong. And then immediately after that, you're finding that they're now, quote unquote, ready for marriage. So then you're having a lot of child marriages. So we need to tie up also fighting female genital mutilation, not just from the male engagement point of view, but the different ministries, like what Dr. was talking about, Ministry of Education, you know, school retention, health, for example, because then this is we need to start educating people about what is this, what are the consequences of this, what's the downside of it, so that not just, yes, it's a crime, but what exactly happens? You know, you have more children, you cannot have healthy life, so to speak, you know, education, transition, and all that. So it needs to be brought up wholesomely, but it is very wrong.
And Chairperson, I would like you to touch on the psychological violence aspect of it, because, and even if we first of all look at the number of school-going students or pupils who have committed suicide because of some demands or some pressure from their parents because of perhaps how they performed or what they do at home. When we look at the psychological one, it could be a little bit harder to detect. And unfortunately, in some instances, we have seen people take their lives. And when people take their lives, then Alberta will not be in business. But if we are able to check this out, we can be able to help these people, and we can be able to now rope in the likes of Alberta so that we may help these people, because it's something that can be well hidden, unlike the physical violence.
Thank you very much. I think when it comes to psychological violence, it is one of the silent killers. It's so silent, such that what is happening to me, at times I don't want to share with anyone. It is only to me. And when it overwhelms myself, I just go and commit suicide. Now, who is the person best qualified to deal with this? And this is our whole Ministry of Health. There is the mental health campaign. I call it a campaign because there's a real campaign on that. Because we have seen, particularly the police officers, we have seen our police officers killing themselves and at times killing their families just because they have a firearm. We have seen women who wake up and say, now I'm just going to murder this man, the man next to me. And they do it and they succeed. Now, why are they doing this? It's because their cry, nobody saw it, nobody helped them, and our Minister of Health should be able to do this. But when it comes to the youngsters in schools, there is the counseling that goes on in schools, and the school should be able to detect that counseling teacher, whether male or female, should be able to detect that this child has a problem. And that problem should be reported not only to the parents, but also to the health facilities so that the child is assisted. Because when this violence is so silent, it will just kill, and I don't know any other way that it will come out unless it is addressed. So it is one of the worst types of GBV. Because if I were to give an example, I'm just at home, and somebody comes and tells me, you know, you are not the child of your father. And therefore, when it comes to inheritance, we shall deal with you. They keep on telling me that. Now, I'm not able to ask my parent, am I really your child? I'm not able to ask that. But these people are constantly bashing me on it. So what do I do? Where do I turn? For the girl child, they have this tendency of turning to auntie. So in Nairobi or in the cities and in the towns where auntie is not, what happens? Something bad is going to happen. So I would say, as much as there is Ministry of Health, there is all of us to take care of that, we should also remember our social setups. We should be able to listen to our children. We should make time for our children. Anybody below the age of 18, the parents should be concerned. I know we go to work and forget that we need time with our families. Everyone should be able to make time, at least one day, so that the child has somebody to confide in, a person that does not threaten. I know, as I say this, somebody asked me, Madam, are you aware? And this was somebody in one of the national universities. Are you aware I'm being molested by my father? I said, no. How can your father molest you? I said, my father is always wanting to take me for shopping before I go to school. I go to college. He takes me to a salon. After the salon, he says how beautiful I am. And before he drops me, he takes me to a lodging. I was so disgusted. And this is a university person. And this is the father. Now, where do you confide? I want to call upon the fathers. Please, let us have your daughters being able to confide in you. You are the father. You can't be the one molesting them. So I'm so disappointed when it is the parent who becomes perpetrator. Equally disappointed when it is the sibling who becomes the perpetrator. We should be able, at the family unit, to take care of each other as social norms dictate. Thank you.
And because of the interest of time, I'm quite sure Doc here will be listening to this question quite keenly. The policies, the laws that we have to protect anyone who is undergoing any form of gender-based violence, do you believe that is enough to lower the number at rescue centers and in the society?
The legal framework, yes, though there's just been some, what would I say? Like the SOA recently, for example, where you're having them, was it leaving it at the discretion of the judge to decide, you know, the sentencing, yet it was already very clear on how the sentencing should be. So apart from that, I believe that we have enough legal framework. You know, we have a Victims Protection Act, we have a witness agency, we have all that. For me, it's more of the implementation of the same, because then we have all these structures, even just the county governments to be able to set up GBV centers, the shelters, everything else. For me, we have police, for example, with the whole reforms section and a mental wellness section. So everything is in place. So it's just about the actioning, but also government putting resources. When you look at the last 5 years, I don't have the analysis here, but when you look at the 5 years, how much is allocated female genital mutilation, gender-based violence services and all that, it's really a very small component. So it's just putting the resources both in human capital and all that.
Doc, I want to give you a final word on that as you also wrap up.
Thank you. Now, talking of the policies and the legislation, there is one piece of legislation that we are still wanting to work on, and this is the Sexual Offences Act, because it is quite punitive to the girls and the boys.
Especially
because
the young ones.
When the young boy interacts with the young girl, they are treated like grown-ups. I mean, the young boy is punished so severely as though he were grown up. So it is something we are looking at. There is already, I will call it a task force for lack of better word.
And also I remember the CJ talked about it as
well.
Yes,
that is looking at Sexual Offences Act so that we don't punish our boys unnecessarily when it is child to child. That is something that I needed to say. Now, I needed also to touch on the place of work. Gender-based violence and harassment in place of work.
People don't even know that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we are supposed to have policies in every institution to show what we are doing about gender-based violence and sexual violence in the place of work. Now, this has not happened to our institutions. So I will be calling upon them to ensure that we have that. The other thing is there is the ILO, International Labour Organization Convention 190. Kenya has not ratified. And I'm calling upon our good government to ensure that this is ratified before the end of this year. In fact, if I had my way, in the next 90 days, we should be ratifying this so that in the place of work, then nobody is being harassed sexually, because that should not be the case. Finally, there is the issue of the children in conflict with the law. Even when they have been violated, they are put where the other grown-up prisoners or in a police station, the holding ground for everyone. Now, they get molested even more. Now, the Children's Act, and everyone knows that we should have children's protection centers in every county. Now, this has not happened. So I want to call on our good governments, our good governors, to have children's protection center in every part of this country, in every county, so that the children in conflict with the law are not molested. Their rights are not violated any further. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You finished up your last point?
Yes, yes. Please seek for help when there's gender-based, when you're violated, or
where
know
can
someone
people
who's
find
been
you?
violated.
Because this is not the first time you've come here, and there might be someone out there who would want your services, perhaps. Sure.
So there's a national GBV hotline, that's 1195. There's a children's hotline, 116. There's a GVRC hotline, 0800 720 565.
All right.
Yes, so any of the GVRC centers or police stations or hospitals.
Thank you. Alberta Wambua from the Gender Violence Recovery Center. And just next to me, I have Dr. Joyce Mutinda, who is the Chairperson, National Gender and Equality Commission. Ladies, I've had quite a talk with you. And thank you so much for even making time and for your insight as well.
Thank you.
That's where we wrap it up. And now I'm giving the baton to Kurunzi Mashinani and Tamrini, which is coming up in the next 2 minutes. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Bentro Njue. Lensa Odingo is our sign language interpreter. Earlier on, we had Lucy Mwaurapo, who have made this program a success. Thank you so much and have a blessed afternoon.